A biotech company says that it can stop Varroa using RNA. Sounds like a miracle, right? But who's testing it? Who's regulating it? And who really benefits from using gene editing in our beehives? So let's back up. Varroa mites have been a nightmare for beekeepers since the 1990s when they first made it to the United States. Since then, treating hives have basically became a standard of keeping bees alive. No treatment, no bees, but even with all the effort, the numbers are still getting worse. This past winter, the winter of 2025, the United States saw the worst honeybee colony losses ever recorded in history. According to Project APHIS-M, a research company driving science and delivering innovation for healthy bees, we lost 62% of managed colonies across the country. That's not just a statistic. That is devastating for pollination, food systems, and for beekeepers everywhere. The USDA recently released a report summarizing what they've been seeing over the last couple months of the studying that they've been doing. One key concern is a growing resistance for amitraz, a go-to miticide that used to be super effective. It was considered one of the best treatments out there because it didn't hurt your bees and it used to just wipe out all of the mites. But that seems to be changing. I was actually planning on doing a full video on this week, but when the news dropped of a brand new Varroa mite treatment that the EPA is proposing to register as a new pesticide for Varroa control, well, I had to pivot. It's called Vadescana, and it was developed by a company called GreenLight Biosciences. And this isn't your typical pesticide. It's an RNA-based biopesticide designed to stop mites from reproducing. Specifically, it targets a gene called commodulin in the mites, which is what they need in order to reproduce and make more babies. So instead of killing the pest outright, you give it a strand of double-stranded RNA that turns off this commodulin gene and stops the Varroa mites from reproducing. So you can kind of think of it like flipping off a genetic light switch. But what's appealing here is that it doesn't kill the mite, it just sterilizes it. And unlike traditional pesticides, it's supposed to be species specific, meaning that it shouldn't hurt bees in theory. In trials, they tested two concentrations, one of them being 2 grams per liter and the other 8 grams per liter of double-stranded RNA. And here is what they found. Vadescana didn't kill the mites outright, but it did reduce their fertility. Most mites exposed to it didn't produce any offspring whatsoever. Both doses worked equally as well, and importantly, neither seemed to harm the bees. 95% of bee pupa were still alive when uncapped, no matter the treatment dose. So yeah, RNA interference is hailed as the next big thing in mite control, but there's honestly a lot to unpack here, from how it works to who's funding it to what could it mean for our bees, the beekeepers, and the environment long term. So what's the catch? On paper, Vadescana sounds promising, but here's where we have to ask the hard questions. First and foremost, it's always important to ask, with everything that's ever tested, who is testing it? The main study was done in controlled lab settings using small hives. Real-world conditions are a completely different story. This is actually something that is usually taken into account when doing research articles on bees, as hives that are in a lab setting do not react the same way as hives that are, say, out on pollination contracts or in honey yards. Weather, reinfestation from nearby colonies, and actual mite loads could all change the outcome drastically. And even in the lab, results weren't perfect. Mite reproduction dropped, yes, but it wasn't total, and some mites still did manage to lay eggs. As the research article states, the majority of Varroa was unable to reproduce, but the term majority implies that some mites may have still reproduced. And with what we have seen after researching Varroa and how it forms a resistance, I am planning to do a full video deep diving into the science of how resistance forms in bees. I'm going to do that next week, so definitely check back for that. But what will happen to the mites that can reproduce despite genetic modifications? Are we going to be creating a superbug? That is the first question that I ask myself. Now, the second question, though, is who is regulating this? Vadescana hasn't fully been approved by the EPA yet. It is still under review, but because it's classified as a biopesticide, it goes through a different and, well, less rigorous approval process than synthetic chemicals. That means no full environmental impact review, no long-term ecosystem studies, and not a lot of transparency about what testing has actually been done. So as of May 29th, the EPA has released an article proposing to register the product, well, soon. So that brings me to the big one. Who is benefiting from this? GreenLight Biosciences isn't just a small startup trying to help bees. They are a biotech firm backed by major investors with the goal of scaling RNA pesticides across all of agriculture, not just for mites, but for beetles, worms, weeds, and, well, yes, even human diseases. But here's the thing, when you start digging into who they are, where their money came from, and what they're actually doing behind the scenes, the story gets a little bit more complicated. So first up, who's backing them? GreenLight Biosciences was founded in 2008, and they pulled in some major investment from some pretty big, powerful players. S2G Ventures is very big in agriculture. They also pulled in Morningside Ventures, a global private equity firm, and you've got Continental Grain Company. Yep, a global agribusiness giant. And then you also have Fall Line Capital. These folks invest in farmland and in ag tech in the United States. They even received a $3.3 million grant from the Gates Foundation to work on gene therapy. So they're not really a grassroots startup. And then there's their other focus, human health. Believe it or not, GreenLight hasn't been just working on pest control. They've also been developing for, that global illness that we had a couple years ago. Their main candidate was called GLV-CoV2043. It's an mRNA-based shot designed to work the same way as others that were targeting that well-known C word, spike protein. In lab tests on mice and in hamsters, it triggered a strong immune response and even showed protection against the BA1 variants from, that one disease, that one sickness. Sounds legit, right? They also partnered with the NIH, the National Institute of Health, to help develop next generation mRNA shots. They also collaborated with International AIDS Initiative to launch an early stage trial of its mRNA shot candidate, not in the US, but in Africa, with the aim of producing low cost accessible shots. They also partnered with Rwanda FDA to test booster doses, the Serum Institute of India for mass production, and finally, the Samsung Biologics for scaling up manufacturing. So this tech is not just in beehives, it's also in people's arms too. But here's where things start to unravel a little bit. GreenLight went public during the biotech hype back in 2021 through a SPAC merger hitting a valuation of $1.2 billion. But then, well, it tanked. In just one quarter, they lost $38.8 million, and less than 2 years later, they quietly went private again in 2023 with a $45 million buyout led by the Fall Line Capital. So, in other words, they burned investor trust pretty fast, and now they're under an insane amount of pressure to prove their RNA tech can actually turn a profit. Now, let's get back to the tech itself. So, RNA interference, or RNAi, which is what this treatment is a way of turning off genes by introducing double-stranded RNA into an organism. It's precise, yes, but it's also relatively new in the world of pesticides. And it's also important to remember that once you do release this stuff into a hive, there's no taking it back. The real concern is what happens outside of the lab. Could this RNA fragment affect other insects like wild bees, solitary pollinators, or even beneficial mites? And could it spread through wax, brood food, or even drift to nearby hives? But that's the thing. We don't fully know. And right now, there is really no long-term independent studies that look at the effects of RNA pesticides in real bee colonies year over year. But companies like GreenLight are pushing forward anyway because, the market is there and the technology, well, it sounds clean. But listen, no one's denying that Varroa is a huge problem because it is. And beekeepers have been begging for better solutions for decades. But when a gene-slicing pesticide shows up backed by corporate money with fast-tracked approvals and flashy headlines, we need to stop and ask, is this safe long-term? Who's testing it and who stands to profit from it? And what happens if we get it wrong? Because once a tool enters a hive, it doesn't just affect mites, it becomes a part of the entire ecosystem that we depend on. Bees, farmers, food systems, and the future of generations of beekeepers. So if you're a beekeeper, a farmer, or just someone who cares about food and pollinators, this is the moment to start paying attention. We need more transparency, we need long-term data, and we need to make sure that what helps bees doesn't end up hurting everything else. And hey, don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you want a more honest take on bees and ag and the future of food, well, you know where to find me. So I hope this video was helpful for you guys. I know a lot of you were asking me to cover this, and I would really be curious to know what you think in the comments about this. What is your take on Vadescana, or Varroa is what they're also calling it? Is this something that you'd be willing to use? Is this something that you could get behind, or do you fear what it could possibly bring to our entire food system? Let me know, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Don't quit and be fit.